Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I want to thank you for taking the time away from your businesses and your busy schedules to join us today. So again, on behalf of the Saskatchewan Workers' Compensation Board, I say welcome. I also want to welcome you on behalf of your board members. Larry Flowers, who is the employer rep, and Gary Hamblin, who is the worker rep. Guys, stand up and say hi. Larry's the good-looking one. Yeah. For those of you who have participated in our rate-setting meetings in previous years, you'll know that we have a good deal of information to cover in these sessions, but we will always have time for your questions, of course, after the presentation. So please make notes as we go through the presentation and save your questions for at the conclusion. We expect to wrap up in about 2 hours. In a few minutes, I'll pass things over to Peter Federko, our CEO, who will explain the 2017 preliminary premium rates in more detail and outline the process for determining those rates. Peter will also give an update on the rate model review and some of the recommendations that have come from our external actuary hired to conduct the review. Peter, the board, and myself are joined today by several members of the WCB executive team, as well as staff members who are here for you, should you have any questions. WCB staff will be available at the tables in the back corner, back there, and there, Jennifer gives a big wave, thank you. Some of you have been there already, but please, if you haven't been there, please visit the table to get industry-specific pamphlets and handouts. If you haven't already picked up your preliminary industry rate code package, they are certainly there at the back tables. Each industry package includes rate code specific statistics, as well as the 2017 preliminary premium rate. The question period will be open to everyone, of course, attending, including those who are joining us by webcast today. And welcome to those who are joining us by webcast for sure. We are aware that this session is lengthy, so we must limit the questions to a maximum of 2 questions per person so that everyone can participate. Again, please note your questions throughout the presentation and hold them until our question period. Should you have additional questions, we encourage you, of course, to reach out to us at any time for further discussion. These meetings are an annual part of our rate-setting process, and we believe they are an important step in our accountability to you, our customer. It is also important for you to give us your feedback on our proposed rates. If you'd like to learn more about what we do at WCB, I would also like to invite you to attend our annual Compensation Institute being held in Saskatoon in March of 2017, and of course our annual general meetings in May held both in Saskatoon and Regina. If you'd like more detailed information, we'll be tabling our annual report in the spring. We also publish an annual stakeholder report that provides a comprehensive overview of our annual activities. Again, we truly appreciate the time you're taking from your day to be with us today. Before I was chair at WCB, I had a number of different positions. I did a number of things for sure, including running my own business. So I can relate firsthand to many of the issues that you as employers face. At that time, my own vision statement provided critical guidelines for my employees and for myself. This year, the board and the executive and staff worked to streamline our vision and mission statement. We believe we've boiled it down to the true essence of what we envision for WCB and for our customers, and points to how we expect to get there. Vision and mission statements, I don't know if you're like me sometimes, when you talk vision and mission, your eyes kind of glaze over, but not anymore. Vision and mission statements are often glossed over, but they must be a part of this presentation because we at WCB live these statements every day. Both our vision and mission must be the driving factors for us individually and as an organization, and we take this very seriously. We work to embody these statements in our daily activities when interacting with our customers, working hard to make things better for employers and workers every single day. Having these general sessions, providing a live broadcast, and making today's information available online after the meetings is all a result of our efforts to continuously improve our service to you. Our efforts to be good stewards of your funds mean that we continue to have one of the lowest premium rates in the country. This brings me to our next slide, our premium rate history and 2017 preliminary average premium rate. We are pleased to announce the preliminary average premium rate for 2017 is $1.24, down from $1.34 in 2016. This is our lowest premium rate in over 30 years. The slide shows the average premium rate history and its downward trend. In 2004, our average employer premium rate was at a 13-year high of $2.05. Since then, we've had a series of decreases that have resulted in an 81 cent or a 39.5% drop. This continued rate reduction is because of your commitment with your employees to reduce the number of injuries in your workplace. You will see that some of our compensation board counterparts across Canada have also announced their 2017 average premium rates, and other provinces will be letting their employers know in the weeks ahead. If you see that, the chart there, Nova Scotia's rate remains at $2.65. BC has dropped to $1.66. Ontario has dropped by 13 cents. New Brunswick has increased from $1.11 to $1.48. And Yukon's average premium rate will increase by 2 cents in 2017. We are anticipating we will have the third lowest premium rate in Canada. But bear in mind that as a board, we don't strive to have the lowest rates in Canada, and that might surprise you. Instead, our key obligation is to maintain a balance between stable rates and a fully funded compensation system. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite our CEO, Peter Federko, to come to the podium and to present to you the details around our 2017 preliminary premium rates. Peter, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Gord. So first, I just wanted to join with Gord in thanking you all for being here and welcoming you here this morning, as well as those who are joining us by webcast this morning. So we're close to 40 people in this room this morning and another 24 or so joining us by webcast. So today, as Gord mentioned, we're going to get into some of the detail in terms of how premium rates for 2017 were calculated. During 2016, during this past year, we undertook a rate model review with an independent actuary. Eckler did a rate model review for us, and they made several recommendations, 7 in total, for enhancements to the rate-making model that we currently use. So later on in the presentation, I will give you a summary of the recommendations that Eckler has provided to us. But for purposes of setting the 2017 rate, we're going to continue to rely on the existing rate-making model for reasons that I'll explain to you a little bit later. So really there are 3 elements that go into the rate-setting process. The first is what we call the classification. So that's determining which employers should be grouped with which employers in order to determine premium rates at an industry level. Secondly, we actually go through the process of determining what the premium rate for the industry ought to be for the coming year. And step 3 is then applying experience rating to that industry rate to recognize individual employer experience and performance relative to their peers. So we adjust that premium rate to the individual employer level by applying the experience rating, and I'll talk in greater detail about each of these elements. So the first thing that happens is we have to group our employers according to some sort of risk pooling. So one of the fundamental concepts of the workers' compensation system is this notion of collective liability. Workers' compensation is really just another insurance program. And like any other insurance program, risks are pooled in certain categories. So if we think about, our auto insurance, depending on the type of vehicle that you drive and perhaps your age, you will be put in a class with other vehicle owners with similar types of vehicles, exposing that particular risk group to the same kind of hazards or risk with respect to injury. We undertake a similar process with respect to rate setting for workers' compensation purposes. We take all the employers and we group them basically by their business activities, with the assumption being that if you're in the trucking industry, all truckers basically are exposed to the same risks and hazards, and therefore, from a collective liability perspective, all employers in the trucking industry ought to be grouped together, and the rate calculated on the basis of the collective experience of every employer in that class. So not unlike any other risk pooling that we would see with respect to any other insurance program. For our purposes, we've taken all the employers, about 48,000 employers in this province, registered with us, and we divide them up into 50 what we call industry rate codes. And we determine the premium rate for all of those employers in those respective rate codes, again, based on the collective experience of everybody that's in that rate code. So that's the starting point in terms of the premiums that employers would pay us. The second piece of it is actually now the determination of the rate for each of those individual 50 rate codes. We typically look at past experience as a predictor of what future experience is going to be. So remember, what we're doing here today is we're telling you about the premium rate we want to charge for 2017. So we're sitting here in 16, we're trying to predict what the costs and injuries are going to be for 2017, so we set the premium for all of those injuries. One of the fundamental requirements of our rate setting process is that the rate established for 2017 pays all current and future costs of injuries that occur in 2017, so that the employers in 2017 are the ones responsible for all of the claims costs for all of the injuries that occur within that calendar year. To do that, we look at past experience. So with respect to compensation payments, we look at the last 5 years and use that 5 years of experience to determine what we might see in terms of experience for 2017. For other cost categories like vocational rehabilitation and healthcare, we look at the last 3 years considered it being a better representation of what might be expected in the future. So our first task is to try and determine what the claims costs will be for 2017 with respect to all injuries that will happen in 2017. With respect to fatalities, we use an averaging again for all fatalities. So every rate code is charged the same amount with respect to the average fatality cost over the last 10 years. So if that's $120,000, we would charge every individual rate code with that same amount of $120,000 for fatalities. So all of those costs get added into the system. We project out claims costs for 50 years. Why 50 years? People can start working as early as the age 15, and our responsibility from a workers' compensation perspective ends at age 65. So we've got 50 years of potential benefits being paid. So again, we look at the past experience with respect to what costs have been paid, and we use that to forecast what we might see in the future. We then go through the process of determining what the payroll is. We charge you on the basis of $100 of payroll. And the industry premium rate is simply what that revenue requirement is based on what our expected costs are, divided by what we anticipate for payroll. So the two elements, again, that go into the setting of the premium rates are the actual claim costs themselves and the payroll. Claims costs, again, projected on the basis of number of injuries and cost per claim that we expect to see next year, and payroll I'll get into in a little bit more detail. There's two things that really impact our costs, and the first is the frequency of injuries, which we calculate using something called the injury rates. So the blue line here represents what we call the total injury rate. The total injury rate is simply the total claims that have been accepted divided by the number of full-time equivalents that we have covered. So it doesn't matter whether these are medical-only claims or there's time loss. When we calculate the total injury rate, we're taking into account all injuries that have occurred and have been accepted and paid by WCB. The yellow line represents what we call our time loss injury rate, and that is simply the number of claims that are serious enough to take a worker out of the workplace for at least 1 day beyond the day of injury, divided by the number of workers that we covered. So these would be what we would consider to be the more serious claims, where there's actually time away from work and we're making wage loss payments to that worker because of the work injury. Both of these you'll see very, very nice trend with respect to reduction in those injury rates. For 2015, we ended with a total injury rate of 6.3%, which was below our target of 6.8%. We had a time loss injury rate of 2.07, which again was below our target for that year. We are forecasting for 2016 based on data that we have to the end of September, so we're projecting out to the end of the year. We expect to end the year with a total injury rate of 5.88% and a time loss injury rate of 1.94%. That's a combination of two things: the number of injuries that we're seeing, as well as the number of workers that are working. And what we've seen over this 5-year period is a reduction in both the total injuries that have been reported to us, as well as the time loss injuries that have been reported to us. So as it relates to total injuries, we've seen about almost an 8,800 reduction in the number of claims over that 5-year period. For time loss injuries, we've seen a reduction of over 3,500 time loss claims. At the same time, over that same 5-year period, we've seen a growth in the full-time equivalents that we cover of about 38,000. So when you take the combination of the growth in the workforce and the reduction in the number of claims is where we see the positive results in terms of the reduction of the injury rates. The reduction of claims that we're seeing from 2015 to what we're projecting for 2016, with respect to total claims, we're seeing just over a 1,400 claim reduction, and at the time loss, about a 450 claim reduction to the end of the year. So extremely positive results that ought to impact our costs. The second element is our claim durations. And claim durations are simply the average length of time that someone is receiving wage loss payments before they go back to work. And you'll see the trend here is not as positive as what we're seeing with respect to the number of injuries. We've actually seen a growth in the duration of claims from 2011 all the way to 2015 of about 4.5 days. And we've seen a further increase, or we're projecting a further increase from 2015 to 2016 of about another 3.5 days. So what would be driving these duration numbers? Well, according to analysis that we've done, the majority of that increase is the result of the change in the mix of claims. So 3,500 time loss claims have come out of the system. 8,800 total claims have come out of the system. What's left are the more serious injuries that typically have a longer duration. And so simply by mathematics, the average duration of claim is going to go up. It accounts for more than half of what we're seeing in terms of the increase in claims. Second element that would impact our claim durations are decisions that are made on retroactive claims, for example. So if an appeal decision were rendered and then there was retroactive pay on that, the total cost of those, or the total number of days associated with those claims, would go into our duration calculations. The other thing, the second largest impact on our durations, are the changing severity. We have seen a fairly significant increase in claims relating to back injuries, shoulder injuries, and leg injuries, as well as multiple parts of body injured in the same incident. And that has contributed, about a 25% of what we're seeing in terms of the increase in claim durations. There's about 1 day there that relates somehow to our own internal processes or something breaking down with respect to the return to work that we are investigating through our process reviews at the office. So when we see the reduction in claims, we expect to see a reduction in costs. We see an increase in durations, we expect to see an increase in costs. Well, here's what our costs look like. So sure I can see this, the blue line are our healthcare costs. Single largest, fastest growing element of our compensation system. Peaking out, we're expecting to see about a 6% increase between 2015 and 2016. The reason for that increase has to do, and it relates again to the severity of injuries. We've seen more than half of that increase, again, is related to fees associated with tertiary treatment centers. So tertiary treatment centers are the centers where we send injured workers whose recovery is not going as well as perhaps we would expect, or where other factors, psychosocial matters perhaps, are creeping into the recovery of the injured worker. And so we're seeing those fees with respect to healthcare increase. On the compensation side, we're again expecting about a 12.5% increase to the end of 2016. The reason for that increase, so that equates to about $7.5 million. The reason for that increase is related to a few things. So I talked to you about increasing durations. That equates to about $1 million of that particular amount. The big impact really has to do with our increasing maximum insurable. So you may recall that in 2014, legislation was introduced that increased our maximum assessable, maximum insurable earnings. And so as the increase in the maximum grows, and these are now indexed, so with respect to claims that happened after 2014, the legislation requires that we get the maximum insurable up to the point that it equates 165% of average industrial wage by 2019. So since 2014, there's been a steady progression in terms of increasing that maximum insurable. And as that maximum insurable goes, of course, for high-income workers that sustain injuries, we're going to pay out more in benefits. The maximum for 2015 was $69,000. For 2016, it's $69,000. We're up from about $62,000 the year before, and that's contributing to the lion's share of the increase that we're seeing in our compensation costs. For 2017, the maximum insurable will go up to over $76,000. Vocational rehabilitation, also seeing a very small number really, but a fairly big percentage increase. And that's driven by primarily two things. Home and workplace vehicle modifications required as a result of permanent impairments. And secondly, there were additional training being provided, particularly in the manufacturing and construction sectors. Again, because the worker could not return to their original pre-injury job, there had to be additional training provided in order to make those people employer in another area. The other two categories really are earnings replacement and survivor benefits are basically flat and very, very stable. So the other element that goes into this is, of course, the payroll. So that's the base on which we charge you your premium rate. We are projecting an increase in payroll to $23.6 billion from $22 billion that we're estimating 2016 to come in at. When we spoke to you last year at this time, we were expecting payroll for 2016 to come in at about $22.4 billion. We've had to revise that forecast because we have seen a slowdown in reported payroll. However, we are expecting about a 7% increase between 2016 and 2017. 3% of that roughly attributed to economic growth, and 4% as a result of the increase in the maximum insurable. So employers are going to pay us more premium, even though the premium rate is going down, because the maximum insurable is increasing to $76,000. There's a likelihood that the total premium could actually go up. So the payroll reported to us is based on that maximum insurable. We're expecting about a 4% of that 7% increase to be caused by that increase in the maximum. So when we boil it all down, the majority of the premium is driven by claims costs. About 70% of the premium is driven by claims costs. 6% are driven by our prevention activities. The lion's share of that has to do with the funding that we provide to occupational health and safety. So under legislation, we're required to fund the entire budget of occupational health and safety in the Ministry of Labor Relations and Workplace Safety. And so that really accounts for the lion's share of that. Also included in that number will be funding that's provided to safety associations, as well as the money that we would spend through our WorkSafe program internally. The balance, the 24%, are the administration costs, the costs of actually running our operation on a day-to-day basis. When we look at the composition of the premium rate, what you can see from this slide is actual elements that all go into the determination of the premium rate. And you'll see every category is seeing a fairly nice decrease, administration costs staying flat at 33 cents. Compensation costs account for over 88 cents of that $1.24. Now, I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about the new rate-making model, and I think this is a good place for us to draw some comparisons between what we're currently doing and what we're going to use for the 2017 premium rate, and what the board has approved in terms of the model to be used to establish the 2018 premium rates. So the actuary essentially said, the model that you're using is sound. It works well, particularly in calculating the board level rate, this average premium rate of $1.24. But what they recommended is that there should be some tweaks that are provided to the model in order to kind of modernize it and make it more relevant in terms of balancing fairness and accountability in the system with this idea of collective liability. So we want employers, we want rate codes to be accountable for their own performance, but at the same time we recognize that there is the need for this collective sharing of the risks within the compensation system. So the other element that the actuary was really interested in, and we asked him to have a look at, was the predictability of costs and premium rates into the future. So is the model that we're using effective in predicting future costs? Again, he said, doing it at the board level, at the average premium rate, you do a good job in terms of being able to predict performance. But where the model breaks down for a variety of reasons is when we go to allocate that $1.24 across all of the rate codes. And one of the issues the actuary identified was something that we call credibility. Credibility is simply the degree to which you can rely on past performance to predict future performance. We have 50 rate codes, as I said earlier, and the majority of those are very small rate codes, susceptible to swings in their premium rate because of experience in any particular year. Now, Gord mentioned in his opening remarks, our objective in terms of setting premium rates is to provide premium stability. Not necessarily the lowest rate, but the most predictable and stable rates that we can provide based on information that we have. The actuary has recommended some changes to how we determine the credibility of various rate codes. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about each of these recommendations because I'm going to save that for some other meetings I'm going to tell you about that are coming up, later this winter. But the actuary basically said you need to pick a different sort of, instead of 5 years of past experience for these small employers, where the performance, their experience could be very volatile, we should look at a 10-year period for those particular small employers. The other thing he encourages us to do is actually to consider the whole classification process and look at merging smaller rate codes together with other rate codes that might have similar risk exposures. The other big 3 recommendations that he made were related to the predictability of costs. Under the current model, as I said, we attempt to forecast the number of claims we're going to see next year, using our forecast for injury rates and previous experience. And then we try and forecast what the average cost per claim is in order to come up with what the total costs are going to be for the coming year. What the actuaries determined by doing some analysis is that the predictability of time loss rates with the big decline in injury rates over the last several years is not consistent with what we're seeing in terms of the growth in costs. So the injury rates or number of time loss claims is no longer a reliable predictor of what future experience might be, and is recommended now that we actually look at costs as opposed to number of claims in terms of predicting what the future experience might be. And so the board has approved that recommendation. He also added the element that we will look at the changes in the workforce. So if the workforce is expected to increase by 2% in the coming year, we will basically index those historical costs by the expected growth in the workforce. Also related to predictability of costs has to do with cost pooling. So we want to maintain, as I said, this collective liability concept, which is one of the fundamental principles of the workers' compensation system. And balancing the accountability with the collective liability, it can sometimes be a bit of a challenge. Under the current model, we look at our pension claims, our earnings replacement claims. So those are our long-term where there is permanent loss of earnings, there's a permanent impairment attached to that particular claim. And we cap the costs of those particular claims at $90,000 per claim. All costs above the $90,000 then are shared among all employers. The actuary said that's a good practice in terms of pooling those costs, but he said the $90,000 fixed, and it's been $90,000 for an awful long time, is not necessarily a fair representation of what we're going to see in the future. And so what he's recommended and the board has approved is changing the pooling threshold from that $90,000 to a proportion of the maximum insurable earnings. So 3 times the maximum insurable earnings once we get to 165% of average industrial wage, which we estimated over $90,000. So by 2019, that $76,000 that we're seeing for 2017, we expect to grow to over $90,000. So what we look at then is we take 3 times of that $90,000 for, let's say, $270,000 for sake of example, and we say any cost in excess of every cost below $270,000 is going to be charged to that rate code. And any costs above that, so for extraordinarily serious and costly claims, are going to be pooled and charged across all employers. So similar concept, simply a change in terms of how we calculate what that maximum cap is going to be. The other thing related to predictability of costs So I told you earlier that we look at costs over a 50-year period because that's the, I guess, outmost expected period of time for which we may be responsible for compensation costs. When we go back and we look at the 5 years of experience, it's possible that in that previous 5 years of costs, there will be costs associated with claims that could be up to 50 years old. What the current model does is assumes that 50 years from today, there will be another cost similar to that one that we saw in the last 5 years' experience. The actuary said that's not a reasonable assumption to make. Rather, what he's saying is, for purposes of determining the past experience, only look at claims that are 7 years old. So when we look at the 5-year average, we would only include in that 5-year average costs associated with claims that are no more than 7 years old. The difference between that cost and the cost taking us all the way out to 50 years would simply be pooled and again charged across all employer codes. The other thing relating to costs had to do with our fatalities. I mentioned to you earlier that what we do for fatalities under the current model is we simply look at the 10-year average cost of fatalities and we charge every rate code with that. Again, the actuary said that's not really a reasonable approach to take because you're not really holding the rate codes responsible for the fatalities as accountable as you ought to be. So what the actuaries recommended and what the board has accepted is we will charge the industries responsible for the fatalities. So the industries in which the fatalities actually occurred will be charged the cost of fatalities up to that maximum cap of, in my example, $270,000. Every cost above that is then going to be pooled and charged across all industry rate codes. So increasing substantially the accountability with respect to industries that have the fatalities in any given year. And that's something that you as employers have said to us you believed was a little unfair in terms of our practice of calculating the 10-year average and charging everybody with that particular element. The last element that the actuary talked about was the allocation of our administration costs. Excuse me. So today what we do is we divide our administration costs between fixed and variable costs. Fixed costs are the costs that just to keep our lights on basically and are not necessarily driven by our claims volumes. Our variable costs are those that are driven by claims volumes. In large part, our variable costs really have to do with the salaries and benefits of those people who are administering the claims or managing the claims. Our fixed costs have to do with all of the other support mechanisms, so our IT systems, our lights, and all of that sort of stuff that goes into just keeping the place going, and all of the other services that aren't necessarily tied to claims volumes. So in theory, the more claims or more costs that you have, the more you're going to draw on those claim management services than those people who don't have them. So under the current model, we say, as I said, we assume that 10% of the costs were fixed. And we allocate those fixed costs against all employers on the basis of payroll. The other 90% we consider to be variable costs, and we allocate those across all employers on the basis of claims costs. The actuary suggested that that was not a reasonable separation between fixed and variable costs. He actually recommended that we go 50% fixed and 50% variable. But we actually did the analysis based on our budget and our financial results, and about 30% of our costs are what we would consider to be fixed, and 70% are variable. So the new model will take our administration costs, 30% of those administration costs will be spread across all employers on the basis of payroll. 70% will be spread across all employers on the basis of claims costs. So if you have higher claims costs, you're going to be paying a greater proportion of those variable costs. If you have high payroll, you're going to be paying a greater proportion of the fixed costs. And the reason the actuary said that was more fair was because even if you have high payroll and you're still drawing on our employer services and all of the other ancillary services that we provide outside of case management, you still ought to be responsible for your fair share of the operations of the board. So the reason we did not implement this, as you can imagine from the overview that I've given you with respect to the recommendations, is some industries, well, we ran the new model in parallel with the 2017 old model. And the board level premium rate came out exactly the same. So the new model will not drive out necessarily a different average premium rate at the board level than the old model did. But what it will do is it will change the allocation of that premium rate across the 50 rate codes that we have. So those who have a large number of fatalities are going to be paying a greater proportion of the fatality costs than they were in the past. Some of these, the impacts are fairly significant on the rate codes, and the board believed, and we, the administration, concurred, that we needed some soak time with employers. We couldn't just show up here today and say, hey, we introduced a new rate model, here's the impact to you, you're going to see your premium rate go up, without providing really detailed information and education around the elements of the rate model, which I've really, quite frankly, glossed over here this morning. Because the impacts are, and so some employers are going to pay more than what they have in the past, and some are going to pay less because of the different elements of the rate model. Because the swings can be fairly significant depending on the rate code, the board is interested in talking to employers about how this might be phased in. So we're definitely implementing the model, but how do we mitigate the potential impacts of the big swings in premium rates that would be caused at the rate code level over some period of time? So we intend on going into an educational program to advise employers more specifically in a little more detail about the elements of the new rate model, and have industry-specific meetings to advise industry groups of the particular impact on their specific industry. So, getting back to the 2017 rate under the existing model, the majority of employers are going to see their premium decrease. So roughly 95%, I think it is, just under 95% of employers, which is about almost 46,000 employers, are going to see their premium rate actually decrease. There's a very small percentage, about 0.5%, 212 employers that are going to see their rate go up by less than 10.5%. And there's another portion of employers here, around 2,400, that are not going to see any change in their premium rate. Now, the next element of our rate setting process is the experience rating program. So every employer, again, don't mean to pick on trucking, so let's go to banking. Every employer in the banking industry is going to pay the same industry banking code. But in order to, again, increase accountability at the individual employer level and encourage investment in injury prevention and return to work, we apply experience rating now to the employer premium rate. And so the individual employers within that group will pay varying amounts depending on their individual injury experience. So simply put, I guess, employers who cost the system more will pay more after application of the experience rating program. Now the program, we made a commitment to have the program evaluated every 3 or 4 years. That evaluation did occur in 2014. The board did approve the changes to the experience rating model, and we're implementing those effective 2017. So part and parcel of the 2017 premium rate is going to be applying the new experience rating program. As it exists today, the experience rating program is split into 2 categories, or 2 programs. We have what we call the standard program, which is really designed for small employers. And we define small employer as someone who has paid us less than $15,000 in premiums over the last 3 years. That program is frequency-based, so it's based on the number of claims that you have. Under that program, small employers can receive a maximum discount of up to 25% and a maximum penalty or surcharge of up to 75%. So you can have a 100% swing in the premium rate based on your experience relative to others in your industry. So if you had bad performance, you're going to pay a surcharge. If you have good performance, you're going to get a discount. Under the advanced program, again intended for large employers, whose premiums paid to us exceed $15,000 over the last 3 years, it is cost-based. So in the advanced program, we look at your injury costs and we compare that basically to the average for your industry. And if you're worse than your industry, you're going to pay more. If your costs are better than your industry, you're going to pay less. Under the advanced program, the maximum discount is 30% and the maximum penalty or surcharge is 200%. The board struck a experience rating committee to review the experience rating program. They made a few recommendations to the board for changes to the particular program. And a particular focus for the committee, I would say, was the standard program and the impacts on experience rating for that group of small employers. So the first recommendation that was approved by the board that will become effective in 2017 is we've increased the threshold from $15,000 to $21,000. So if you paid us less than $21,000 over the last 3 years, you're going to be in the standard program. If your premiums jump up over $21,000, you're going to jump into the advanced program and be subject to those particular elements of that particular program. So cost-based, higher discount, higher penalty. What the committee discovered, however, was that this could cause some problems to employers who, because of payroll growth, because of the increases in the maximum insurable, so that they're reporting larger payroll to us, they could actually see their payroll grow to the point where they break the threshold, but yet their claims experience hasn't changed. And on occasion, for a small group of employers who break that threshold and jump into the advanced program, it can actually cost them their discount. So based on that finding by the committee, the board decided that we would provide for transition purposes a grandfathering, if you will, of that employer's experience. What I mean by that is, if in the standard program you have good claims experience, so no frequency of claims, and you're moving into the advanced program, we're going to let you keep that injury experience with you into the advanced program until you have new claim activity in the advanced program. And then you'll become subject to the cost thresholds and the discounts and premium that are afforded within the advanced system. The other thing that the committee brought up to us was a concern by employers because, again, in the standard program. Standard program, as I said earlier, is frequency-based. So if you have one time loss claim, you lose your discount. And what we discovered, what the committee discovered, is there were employers out there who, as a result of a medical appointment, were having their claim registered as a time loss claim. So here's what I mean by that. So you have a worker who's injured, receiving medical treatment, but they come back to work. But they have to have ongoing medical appointments. So they take an hour off work, go see their physical therapist or their doctor or whoever, and come back to work. That 1 hour of missed work is considered lost time because we receive a medical report from the doctor, and now we're obligated to pay for that 1 hour of missed time. And as soon as we pay some wage loss, it automatically trips over in our system as a time loss claim. Well, it's not really a lost time claim. And so what the board has decided to mitigate that particular impact is to exclude from the number of time loss claims that would go into determining the standard program performance those absences that are related to medical appointments only. So we think those were great observations and insights from the committee that led to these, I think, improvements and creating more equity and fairness between the standard and advanced program. After we apply the experience rating, so you remember in 2 charts ago, I guess it's more than that. Back here, almost 95% of employers were actually seeing their premium rate decrease. When we apply experience rating, that drops to about 70%. Or I'm sorry, 80%. And that's because within that group of the 95%, there must be employers whose experience required a surcharge to be applied, and as a result, their premium rate is not going down anymore, it is now going up. We now have employers that are going to see their premium rate increase. A group of them that are not going to see them change. We actually have some employers, I can't tell which color that is. Is that this one? We now have some employers who are actually going to see their premium rates go up by more than 10.5%. Whereas prior to experience rating, there weren't any employers that fell in that category. And there were only a very, very small percentage, about 0.5% of employers that were going to see their premium rate go up at all. We've now got like over 6% of employers that are actually going to see their premium rate go up. Again, we think that's fair and reasonable. And actually what you guys have been telling us, employers have been telling us with respect to ensuring that the people who are costing the system the most, who are utilizing the system the most, pay a disproportionate share of the costs. So what's next? So we get through here today. We repeat this thing minus the webcast up in Saskatoon tomorrow so that our northern customers have the opportunity to hear this as well. Traditionally, what the board has done is provided for 30 days for employers to consider what they saw here today and things that we told them with respect to the preliminary premium rate. I'll come back to the new rate model in a minute here. But with respect to the $1.24, we reserve 30 days to receive any feedback from any employers with respect to that preliminary premium rate. After that 30-day period, we would assemble all of the feedback, any feedback that we receive, provide that to the board, and the board would then approve the premium rates the latter part of November. And in December, we would actually mail out the employer notices with respect to what they're going to be paying in 2017. So, in summary, just the new rate model again. Oh, by the way, so as Gord mentioned in his opening comments, individual industry presentations are available at the back table. So if you want to know what's happening in your particular rate code, if you haven't done so already, you can go pick up your package. If you would like to have a meeting specific to your particular rate code and the experience within that rate code, please contact one of our account managers and they'd be happy to arrange something to have an industry-specific meeting with you. So with respect to the new rate model, again, just very, very high summary. Basically, the model is good, it's sound, it collects the revenue required at the board level, but it required some overhaul, some refinements. Recommendations accepted and implemented by the board. We're going to look at the classification and credibility of industries. We're going to use claims costs as opposed to number of claims to predict future costs. We're going to allocate fatalities more so to the rate codes responsible for the fatalities. We're going to implement a new maximum for claims cost pooling, and we're going to cut off the tail with respect to these very, very old claims in terms of our ability to predict the future. And lastly, changing the way that we allocate our administration costs across the various rate codes. As I said, we believe it's important that all employers have the opportunity to understand the new rate code and its implications. And so let's say November 22nd, starting November 22nd in North Battleford, we'll be holding a series of regional meetings open to all employers within that particular region. So one in North Battleford, 2 in Saskatoon, 1 in Prince Albert, 2 in Regina, 1 in Yorkton, and 1 in Swift Current. Following those sessions, we'll be inviting employers to industry-specific meetings in the new year. So starting in January, we want to be completed by the end of March. We'll be sending invitations out, inviting employers within individual rate codes to come and hear, again, about the new rate model, and now specifically on how that model is going to impact your premium rates, so that we can have that conversation, have that education being performed, and receive from you feedback, input into what a reasonable way of actually transitioning from the old model to the new model might be. How we might mitigate the impacts, which again, in some cases are going to be fairly significant when we get down to the individual rate code level. So that'll happen, through January and March, where we have the industry-specific meetings. I understand as you leave here today, you'll be given a little flyer that just tells you what all the meeting dates are and times and place, and how you can start registering for those particular sessions. So we're hoping that by spreading out across the province like this, we're going to get more employers. Our challenge has always been getting employers to actually come to the meeting and understand what actually goes into their premium rate, instead of reacting when they actually get their bill and saying, now, what the heck happened here? How come this happened the way it did? So we're really doing our, level best to try and reach out and get as many employers educated about what the new model is going to be and receive some input from the industry with respect to how we might implement this. Of course, last not least, it would be remiss upon me if I didn't put in the plug for Mission Zero. We can all impact the premium rates that we pay by simply reducing the number of injuries. The least expensive injury that we have is the one that never happens. If an injury does occur, of course, the better we are at managing that claim and getting that injured worker back to work, the greater impact we're going to have on our costs and the greater impact we're going to have on our overall premium rates. I realize that's probably like drinking from a fire hose this morning. A lot of information about what went into your 2017 premium rate and what you should expect in terms of an overview of the model that's going to establish your 2018 premium rates. I want to thank you all again very much for joining us here this morning, and for all of you joining us by webcast, thank you for tuning in this morning. And I think we're going to open it up for questions now.